All right, I'm starting to see some people joining here. Welcome. We're going to give it a couple minutes here, and then we'll get started a couple minutes past the hour. Great, seeing some more people joining in now. As I said a second ago, we're going to give it a couple minutes here to wait for folks to join in, and we'll start here a minute or two past the hour, and we'll get right into it then. Thank you everyone for joining. Great. Well, just one more time, I'll say thanks everyone for joining here this morning. We'll get started in just a minute as we wait for the last few folks to trickle in here, but really appreciate everyone joining here on time, and we'll get started in a moment. Awesome. Well, it looks like most folks who are planning to join are online now. So we will go ahead here and get started. First of all, like I said before, and if you're just joining here for the first time, thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar here with Logic.io, Salesforce, and Novus CPQ. Really excited to go through what we're about to go through today. A really exciting time for us here at Logic.io in particular, and really excited to have the speakers that we have on board in Fazal, Brion, and Frank here this morning. So today, as you know, we'll be going through Logic.io's admin experience with the team here, and how to achieve a high-powered, low-maintenance configuration experience with Logic.io. So we'll get right into it here, and I'll hand it over to our speakers in a moment. But first, I just wanted to set the agenda. Like I said, we will go through the introduction of our speakers, Brion, Frank, and Fazal. We'll then hand it over to Brion, who will give us a brief overview on Salesforce Revenue Cloud and how Revenue Cloud and Logic.io are working together. We'll then hand it over to Frank and Fazal, who will go through what it actually takes to maintain a CPQ effectively, and go through an overview of Logic.io, which will then bring us into a demo of our configuration maintenance that Fazal will lead. Throughout the presentation today, please feel free to go ahead and drop questions in the Q&A section that you should be able to see on your screen, and we'll go ahead and address those at the end of the presentation. We'll leave some time there to go through that. Awesome. Without any further ado, we'll go ahead here and introduce our speakers here today. Starting with Logic.io's VP of Product, Fazal Gupta. Fazal here has over a decade of experience in the CPQ space and experience with enterprise applications in general, where he's led product and engineering teams at companies such as Big Machines and Oracle. So a ton of great experience that he's brought here to the Logic team. And we're really excited to see what Fazal will walk us through today with the Logic admin experience. We also have Brion Schweers on the webinar today, who will be presenting on behalf of Salesforce Revenue Cloud. Brian's the VP of Revenue Cloud Solutions over at Salesforce. Spent the majority of his career working with CPQ, CRM, and other enterprise sales applications. And for the last 4 years or so, Brian has been over with the Salesforce team working with Revenue Cloud. So really excited to have Brian on to show how the Logic and Salesforce partnership has been going and kind of where we're taking it as well. And then lastly here, Frank Sohn, the president and CEO of Novus CPQ Consulting. Super excited to have Frank on. Frank does a ton of thought leadership around the CPQ space and is super knowledgeable in the CPQ category. He's seen all the solutions. He's done deep dives on all of them and knows the space really well. And has spent a lot of time helping brands make the best decisions when it comes to implementing and selecting CPQ technology. So really excited to have this panel and the expertise that they have to walk us through CPQ administration here today. And what we will start with here today is handing it over to Brian, who will give us an introduction to Salesforce Revenue Cloud. So I'll hand it over to you, Brian.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake. Great to be here with you guys. And I'm going to keep my section pretty short and sweet. There's lots of information out on the internet that can deep dive into Revenue Cloud. But I think what's important for today is that Revenue Cloud is sort of our rebranded vision for CPQ and billing. And it allows us to expand beyond what we typically think of as a CPQ product or a billing product. And our focus is to take control of the entire revenue growth across every channel, transform the buying experience, accelerate new revenue streams, improve revenue efficiency, and to provide deep industry expertise in some very specific industries. High-tech manufacturing are examples that I think are relevant for today's discussion, but obviously there are several others. And if you can just advance to the next slide, Blake. I think the key is the way we envision this is that revenue life cycle always starts with sort of a discovery, selection, negotiation. An agreement is reached, products are consumed, billed, cash is collected, revenue is recognized. And because we live in this subscription economy, most times those products then go through an amendment or renewal process, which takes us back through that infinite loop of, quote to cash. But what's interesting is we see that happening across all these different channels now. And it used to be that a customer would say, well, we're going to serve this market in this channel and that market in that channel. But what we see now is that customers want to be omni-channel. They want their buyers to engage with them across any channel, which means that it could be a direct sales rep for the net new transaction, but it could be customer self-service motion for that amendment or renewal, or frankly, vice versa. And it has to support all these different types of products: one-time sale, perpetual license, subscription products, consumption products, milestone billing-based products. And so we do that with Revenue Cloud, and we leverage the power of the platform in many ways to help us do that. MuleSoft, for example, for integration, Tableau, for example, for revenue intelligence. And then I think if you just click real quick, Blake, the one that I think is relevant to today is this idea of the partner ecosystem or the app exchange. And so Logic is a great new example of a partner that is on the app exchange. And actually, if you go to the next slide, they've built an external config tool that plugs directly into Salesforce CPQ. And I'll wait for the slide. I don't see it painting yet. There we go. So, we're excited to be working with Logic. And I think you'll be excited to see what Fazal presents today. But the point was that in certain situations, there is a need for that light speed performance of a very complex attribute-based config engine that can also generate not just the sales data that's traditional in a CPQ solution, but also the deeper manufacturing data that would go downstream into your ERP system for production. And so, you know, we see that as more and more B2B transactions occur digitally, the speed and accuracy really become critical success factors. So with Revenue Cloud, we look at this omni-channel quote to cash need, and there's many times where the configurator within CPQ is sufficient, but there are certain situations where something a little bit more advanced is required. And so to have a partner that just seamlessly plugs in with our Revenue Cloud solution to do that is a real advantage to many of our customers. So without further ado, let me hand it back over to, I think actually to Frank, but I'll give it to Blake to redirect.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. We'll hand it over to Fazal here, who will give us a brief kind of overview on logic, and then we'll hand it to Frank from there.
Sounds good. Thanks, Blake. Yeah, I'll just expand a little bit more on the great foundation which Brian set up of how logic really is a complement and participant for the Salesforce CPQ ecosystem. Like, we believe the Revenue Cloud vision is awesome. We've been thinking about it and hearing about it from day one. And as some of the things which Brian said are very important to think about, where logic will come into picture. So one aspect is, how do we complement, and where would you think about bringing logic with Salesforce CPQ? So Salesforce CPQ is a great product. It can handle a lot of industries and a lot of use cases. But then there are a few times when you run into things like you have a lot of products, or you have a lot of attribution which you have to apply for products. To do that, you can do that in Salesforce CPQ, but there are few other ways you may want to design and maintain your system. And that's where logic administration, which I've been showing you guys today, will make sense. Like how you can maintain that large attribution data in a much easier manner, complementing Salesforce. The other aspect really comes down to having a lot of rules and attribution driven rules, and having multiple levels of dependencies. So you can have things about A changes B, B changes C, and C again changes A. If you think about those kinds of classical rules engine problems, you need a system or a product which can actually help you do that. And we do that really well, referencing the Salesforce data model itself and providing that kind of a logical capability. And then the kind of the three boxes below in the screen, as you see, they really come down to what are the table stakes concerns now buyers have, and what you expect users to see if you're going to go for an omni-channel vision. So one of the basic ones is around performance. Performance requirements have to be instantaneous, as in my words, in the world we are in, and as we like to call it, light speed. You really want the agility, both from your IT stack perspective as well as from your product perspective, to be able to launch new products quickly. And doing that built on a SaaS product versus a custom build is always going to be a equation you will think about. And SaaS products generally, I would argue, will help you get that agility. And last but not the least, the point which Brian made, which is a very important one, is if you think about many industries and many customers who need a much more detailed bill of materials product, and they need to be able to do that, generate that as part of the selling process without bogging down the entire selling motion. So logic can help with that as well. Go to the next slide. So if you do not have logic, at least in my world, what are the kind of problems which may manifest for you? And I wanted to kind of highlight some of them, if you think about it from an angle of what you may face without something like logic in the picture, if you're trying to solve the problems we talked about in the last slide. So obviously the speed, usability, and performance can be a major factor which can go down over time. It's not which will just suddenly disappear. What happens is, over time, incrementally, you see some things as maintenance increases, you add new products on in that some sort of a design which is not optimal, performance will suffer, and then ultimately it leads to those lost opportunities, or the opportunities you never see just because you did not have the agility to be able to go after them. And if you have a lot of logic and a lot of calculations and functions you want to be able to write, and you haven't done that, and you try to do things like permutations of products to be able to maintain that, that has a direct correlation with high maintenance costs. So your maintenance costs going up with that kind of a logic not being maintained in a proper tool, again hits back at your agility and your sales missed opportunities. And last but not the least, on this theme of omni-channel and self-service, which is becoming a key trend as we look at next 5-10 years, being able to use the same system, same solutions you're building once in multiple channels is going to be just a table stakes and critical element of success for companies. So to make sure that you have that go-to-market capability to go omni-channel, those are the other problems which will manifest if you did not have a tool like Logic in your kitty. Next slide. So if there were three things I would say you want to keep in mind with Logic, and we will keep iterating that throughout the webinar today. Logic is built for the idea of omni-channel. So from day one, we knew that it's for sales and self-service and any other channel which may come up in future. So there is a lot in the architectural underpinnings of Logic to be able to operate in the world of digital, self-service, direct sales, partner sales, and in future even metaverse in whatever way that looks like. If you think about the performance concern, as I said, performance to me is not a luxury anymore. Performance is a table stakes goal you need to have if you want to go digital. And last but not the least, and that is going to be the focus of the webinar, quite a bit of the webinar today, the focus of making customers successful needs to start from, if you think about a Kaizen-like strategy, the admin. So you think about who will make that successful, you need to make the admin successful. And to make the admin successful, you need to give them powerful tools which can handle stuff in a more standard out of the box manner, but they have to be flexible because nobody has a crystal ball. And that the important thing is that's how you build a system which can scale with the customers is very important for their success and for our success. So we've thought a lot about that as well, which we'll cover. Moving on to Frank, I think.
Great. Yep, we'll hand it over to Frank here.
Okay. Good, excellent. So I thought before you look at any kind of demo, that's what I typically do also with customers, right? So when you look at different CPQ solutions, and especially on the maintenance side, I typically recommend to look at least at these 7 steps, potentially more. But let's go through them one by one quickly. And I think I have 3 to 5 minutes, so it will not be very long. But the first important thing is, so you probably have product numbers. Not every customer have, but most have, right? So, and if they have product numbers, you have to get them somehow into your CPQ system. So how do you do that? How easy or how difficult is it? There are certain differences if you have a native solution or a non-native solution, right? So that's the first thing. Should be pretty easy when you do that. Helps customers to get up to speed faster, right? That's the first steps. Then the second step is you also need to get the price list data in there because, again, not every customer has a product number or a price list. So some just store their stuff in an Excel file or something. But if you have a price list, if you have various price lists in various countries, you need to import this, so these price books. And that, again, is also important to get the data quickly into your CPQ solution to get going, right? So to even set up something. So then the third step is really how do you design the user interface, right? So I see that very often when customers look at CPQ solutions, the first impression is always the user interface. It's not the capability that's behind it. It's more like, how does it look like? So you have a couple of folks who have these a little bit aged interfaces that typically gives a disadvantage, even if you have a very good and powerful engine underneath it. It's judged initially by most customers based on what they see, right? So, and when you design this user interface, it's usually helpful to have some help to make that easier for to design an interface a little bit faster, do it a little bit easier, and have more an up-to-date impression of the user interface, because it also helps user to adopt the tool itself, right? So it's not just from a maintenance point of view, it's also, if it looks nicer, I'm more likely to use it. I want to use it, so I don't have to convince you or threaten you to use it. The fourth part, I think that's very key, and I typically spend lots of time with customers on that, is the setup of the product configuration rules. Ideally, it's always the best if that's done by product managers, because they are the closest to these different rules. So as rules come up, as they are changed, it's typically best if they can do that directly. Every time you have to have some kind of communication going between a product manager and an IT person who has to set it up in the system, you're introducing an additional source of challenges potentially, right? So because communication may not be right, it may take some more time to do that. So in addition to that, it's also important to watch out for what kind of rules do you need to implement? How complex are these rules? How much do you want to force people to use the same kind of rules? So when I have certain subsets of products and want to maintain that, I want to guide that with the rules or the framework of the rules that I provide, right? So and there's a whole bunch of different capabilities out there in different CPQ tools, but that's typically a key part to decide who's going to maintain it, how expensive is that over time, and so on. So the fifth one is the setup of the pricing rules and the workflow. So that can be very different here, but you're not just importing the price in the previous step. Now you're also setting up rules, right? So in this case, for customers, the key thing here is, again, you want to have the same prices from your quote until you have your order, right? So, and in this case, you don't want to set up the rules in a bunch of different systems. They have to come from one system. They have to stay consistent, and you want to have ideally one source of truth for this. So you set up the pricing rules. That also includes the workflow rules, where you would say, for example, for discounting, for legal purposes, and so on. So what workflow has a customer to go through? It should be easy to access, especially when you keep in mind people are going on vacation, they are out for a little bit, and you have to set that up in the system. So to access these things is something that's needed on a regular basis, should be easy for the maintenance. Sixth part is setting up the quote output. And that's something I think is important, because lots of customers pay more and more attention to how their output looks like, where you output the quote, right? So just think about the two options that most companies use, as you have either a PDF file, or you're sending something out on a Microsoft on a microsite, where you have more data analytics potentially to see where did the customer go first, what did they analyze, what did they find, and so on. So you have to have a possibility to set this up. That's the very basic one. If you use that for channel purposes, where you have potentially many channel partners who also create their own quote output, you may need even more. So the tools should also account for that. And then you have all in step 7, the additional solution integration. So you all know that, right? So, and I see that very often with customers, you start with a CPQ, but you by default probably need to integrate with a CRM. You may need to integrate with an ERP. You may have a product lifecycle management system. You may have visualization solutions, CAD systems, all kinds of things. And that needs to integrate as well. And that needs to be set up in a timely manner, so that folks can work with it, right? So, and now you could add additional steps on how the integration works between these different solutions. Don't want to go there. It's just, if I would talk to customers about an admin solution, about what Fazal is showing right now, I would tell them ahead, pay attention to these 7 steps and see how well that works for you, to really judge how good that is, right? So, and I think usually you need to think a little bit about these steps before you see a demo, to see what's most important to you. Anyway, I think that's all I had to say about this. I hand it off to Fazal then.
So I would actually spend time in the tool today. So I'm going to be brave enough and do a live demo for all of you. Hopefully that goes well. But few of the things which we will cover, I did want to first of all thank Frank for laying down a pretty conceptually strong and robust framework of how you think about CPQ tools. So as I will go through some of the things, I will show you all the end user experience, kind of to just level set everyone on what experience you can get out of Logic as part of a typical sales motion as a salesperson. We'll then go more towards the administration side, and we will hit 3 key themes out of what Frank talked about. We'll talk a lot about how we deal with the product data, how we interface with that, and what Logic brings to the table and how we look at it. We'll spend a lot of time on the configuration rules and multiple ways to do this in logic. And I'll explain why there are multiple ways, because the spectrum of complexity, to Frank's point, you need to be able to handle that flexibly. And you need the business admins, the product managers, as well as in some cases, IT to be able to maintain those rules. And then we will talk about how logic promotes the concept of usability. The few things which I'll just caveat here, and in case there might be a question in some of your minds. Frank had seven key criteria if you evaluate CPQ, and you will see that logic is focusing on a subset of them. And that is intentional, right? Because for us, we are solving the part of the configuration problem, if you think about, and we want to really complement Salesforce with our configurator. Things where we can leverage the power of Salesforce, which is a great tool and has evolved really well over the last few years. We try and do that really, really well. So some of those things we really rely and work with Salesforce to basically make sure that you get a holistic CPQ experience. And we'll explain some of that today in the demo. So Blake, do you want me to just share my screen and take over?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Might have to enable my screen sharing.
Yeah, let me do that 1 second here. You should be good to go now. Give it a look there.
I can do that now. Thank you. Awesome. Is everybody able to see my screen? Awesome. All right. So here, obviously, you're looking at a very familiar interface of Salesforce. So first, to begin with, I'll not spend too much time within Salesforce. I'm sure many folks in the audience already know that tool very well. So the first thing is, how does an end user or typical sales user will go and interface with logic, right? So that happens is when you are in your quote and you want to add your products, everything is all in Salesforce right now. We are basically complementing, or you can choose what subset of products you want to link and activate for logic. So as Brian mentioned, logic leverages the external configurator integration of Salesforce. So Salesforce provides a standard capability to do that. Using that, you can choose which products really need to link to logic, and you can over time incrementally have the right products interface in logic and other products just be in Salesforce. And you can create one code which can have the mix of the two products. So I keep saying that there is not a rip and replace kind of a strategy you ever have to think about when logic is coming with Salesforce. It's complementary and adding on to the products you may not have been able to either implement, or you want to implement them in a different way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for this cloud workload configurator. And when I click select, this is the point when a sales user is punching into logic. So right now, as you can see, this is an interface which logic powers. This is a Lightning design system based app interface, so complements and it seamlessly fits with the Salesforce UI. As you can see, it's built on that Salesforce UI. And we also provide few other options to make sure that we can get you the right kind of experience people expect in the 21st century. So if you think about some of the basic things people expect, whether you're using a personal site for your professional site nowadays, there is a basic visual appeal aspect which you want. There's obviously the performance aspect. You saw the page load did not take much time. And there is some level of personalization aspect. So from day one, where logic architecture is being built is to think about all those aspects and build that as part of the core architecture. So the first aspect is around the layout of this page, and we will explain a little bit more on that and how this is done. But essentially, providing different kinds of ways for you to be able to lay down your fields, what display you want sliders, you want images for those, you want booleans which can look like switches, or you can have just simple standard drop downs. All of those options are available to you, and that is basically all declarative. How you lay down the fields, what sections appear. If you do not like a section view, you want to see more of a tab view, you can do that, or you can do more of a guided selling view. All of these options are available, and we believe that it's actually something which can be exposed to the end users to be able to make those decisions, because different users have different preferences. So logic can capture what a user selects, whether some user likes a tab-based view versus a section-based view, and that can be used for their codes. So if you think about all those basic personalization capabilities we all are used to on many of the websites we probably use on a personal level, those capabilities are available in Logic from day one. Same thing is extended for different kind of things, whether you want to see your BOM items right when it is being updated, you want to see them on the left, you want to see this entire thing not show up, the page is responsive, so it will show up on an iPad or your mobile phone in the same way it is showing up in the UI here. That's the general idea. So that's by itself not something which is very fancy, but I always feel this is table stakes, and I've seen over the years how in enterprise applications you can get away with a lot until you start thinking about omnichannel. So some of these things, even if people haven't thought about till now, we believe is going to come up more and more. So we've thought about it and are building a tool for that purpose. Now let's get into more CPQ specific things, which are configuration specific things which matter, at least for this audience, I would guess. So if we start doing some selections here, so if I select an option like ERP application, this is a cloud workload configurator where I'm selecting the workload type I'm going to have, the CPU configuration I'm going to do, and some stuff on the network configuration essentially. And we will use that to kind of lay down different capabilities of Logic and how Logic rules engine addresses and approaches these use cases. So the first one, as I selected ERP application, you saw some of the options disappear. There was automatically an option getting selected. So this is all powered using the rules engine approach we take, and as we will cover in the admin side also, and we use the term attribute-based rules engine. These are basically fields in Logic, or they can be called features, fields, attributes. Different people will use different terms, but essentially these are your attributions of the different products you have. Instead of just selecting products, which you can also choose to have these attributions, which can make the rule definition much easier, much more optimized, and much more centralized. So you can consolidate a lot of things based on those attributions. As I select different options here, you can see that the options change and automatically the right option can get selected. If I select a particular option, let's say object data, and then I make another selection, which will automatically make that option invalid. As I said during the rules engine, you want that kind of capability to go back and forth, and Logic can do that. We can give you those messages, whether that is an error. So in this case, it's an invalid option selected. It is shown because the user had explicitly selected it. And that's why a button to go back to the code is disappearing. So Logic can put that hard sort of error. It can give you a warning if it is not a hard stop error, but it might be something user should note, or it may be just informational. You can do those things easily with Logic, and as soon as you will select an option and that invalid option is not valid, is not required, Logic can take that out. So if you think about basic stuff of rules engine, sometimes it's surprising how often people have that as a problem. That going A to B and coming from B to A seems like it would be a very hard thing to solve. And there are reasons why core architecture can become a problem, especially if you're doing a linear engine of approach of rule execution. That can be much harder to solve. Whereas our approach is more of a proprietary solving engine that allows us to do this in a really, really efficient manner at scale. Hopefully you guys can see the performance in your web view right now, but everything on the page is instantaneous. And that's part of the reason why we don't have things like an update button or a loading dialog. That is by design, because we know based on the core solving engine architecture we have taken, we are able to scale to thousands of rules, thousands of options, and we benchmark continuously our application to see that the performance is between 20 to 50 milliseconds on the server side, no matter how many rules you have. And the code ready to that is intelligent rule execution and what rules to execute and what rules not to execute. So we spend a lot of time on that, and that's why we can update the entire state of the configuration, including your BOM items behind the scene, even the manufacturing BOM items, as well as the options you see on the page automatically. And we maintain that with the UI. This is a UI we support, but we basically build it with an API first headless architecture. So the idea is that the same configuration, when you are using it for your e-commerce website, maybe, or maybe some sort of a Slack integration, you wanted to run some commands from Slack, You can leverage the same API set to be able to drive that experience without rebuilding or trying to rebuild some new stuff in your configurator. So that's sort of a core idea to make sure that that usability is high and the maintenance is low. So coming down, I'll explain a little bit on the CPU configuration. So one of the basic things is I'm trying to get a particular utilization. So if the utilization goes down, you're going to get some sort of a message, and this is an example of a warning message, which will not stop the user from going back to the code, but it is telling in this case that you probably do not want to reduce the CPU utilization more than 75% because you're probably paying for idle time. Now, the reason that message is interesting is a lot of times customers have done this with configurators, but they end up defining a lot of extraneous data, extraneous attributes in the system to be able to display this information. We believe that for guided selling, there is a lot of messaging you want to give to the user to be able to do their job effectively and not get overwhelmed. So we provide this kind of a concept of message actions so that you can show messages in the screen without worrying about a particular data element changing or anything like that changing. You can guide those messages automatically, and that is again something you look at the administration side. The one thing which is interesting with our approach, so the kind of selections I made and you saw some of the things happen instantaneously, you could very well make the argument that the kind of selection and the rules look simple enough that it probably is going to be as fast no matter which approach you take, and that's true. But if you think, if you want, I wanted to show you guys a little bit more on how this can be expanded more. So in this case, I have this concurrent user load slider, which is basically a number. Based on what kind of concurrent user load I have, what utilization of the CPU I'm looking for, and what is my operations per second, essentially the load of each operation. I want to get a certain kind of CPU combination for my cloud workload. So I'm trying to buy some compute power for it. And depending on the application, different types of CPUs are available to me. So right now I have a machine learning application with a 64 virtual CPU, 32 virtual CPU, and 1 virtual CPU available. If I was to select ERP, you will see that now I have just 64, 8, and 1. So the combination of CPUs available to you will actually change based on which particular workload type you're doing. When I start changing the max concurrent user load, I want to make sure that you guys pay attention to a few things on the screen. So you will see that we can calculate the quantities of each of the CPUs in real time. We can update that messaging information and the text information on the screen in real time. And we can update the quantity as well as the pricing information coming from product to in real time and show all of that happening instantaneously. So that is what this will look like. So if you see right now, I'll try and keep it slow because sometimes the remote meetings, it doesn't show up properly. But if you look at it right now, you'll see that the numbers are changing pretty much in real time. None of these operations are happening in JavaScript. So these are making AJAX calls back to the server, passing back the new user load information, running the rules, which are basically not one, but multiple rules, which is first figuring out which CPUs are available to you. What is the maximum CPU load I can give you for the highest power CPU, and so on, and then take that remainder capacity and allocate it to the next CPU. So that is what we achieve. And that's why when we say light speed performance, this is what we mean. We don't think there should be any reason any user should require to wait for system to do something, because I think many studies have happened. You guys might have seen those before, that every second you lose when some user is waiting for your operation of your site, especially in typical e-commerce sites, you're probably going to lose about 5 to 7% of your revenue. So if you think about those kinds of studies and think about the wait times typically folks have seen with enterprise applications, taking them to self-service just seems like an impossible task. So because we know the world we are getting ready for and we are going to partner with Revenue Cloud for, this is something which we have looked at from day one. Moving on, there is another construct which I think might be relevant for this audience. So there are, as Brian said, different industries have different use cases, right? And for many industries, actually, Salesforce CPQ configurator works really well. One of the use cases where we also think we can add value as part of being logic is doing the subsystem and more of the substructures you want to have in your configuration. Like in this case, I have a very old looking simple router, but essentially this router has 3 slots. And I could have rules which are running across these multiple slots. So you can have rules which are going to impact, so different products have different bandwidths. If I select a product, the bandwidth within that slot get constrained. So I might just have a slot specific rule. I can have rules which can actually hide some sort of a field and can give you that message using our message actions. And you can also have rules which are going to impact multiple slots. So as you can see, if I selected a double sized product in slot 1, slot 2 is automatically unavailable to me. The reason I'm showing this is these are ultimately the same rule constructs from a rules engine perspective, but this requires a little bit more of a data structure view, what you have to create behind the scene to make sure that it is easily defined by an administrator to be able to do that. And logic provides not only this way of like a slot or subsystem configuration, but you can have different ways to think about these subsystems where you can have those nested products you want to configure and being able to do that really effectively and maintaining them very effectively. And we, as I said, we do all of this, but we think about scale from day one. And to demonstrate that, there are a few things I thought might be interesting for this audience to look at. So to illustrate the example, we have this replicate 1000x as an example. So if I had my CPU configuration and I wanted to replicate it 1000 times, I'll just select this radio button and you will see a few things happen. The actual line items shown in the sales BOM are now 4000. But as you can see, the actual system performance did not degrade at all because the amount of data we are loading on the screen, we are keeping it optimized. Behind the scene, we can calculate that state and we can maintain that information. We also know, and this is something which we work very closely with Revenue Cloud team on, that not every line item required needs to be a sales item unless you require it for some kind of a discounting and approval workflow. Pushing all the line items back to the quote line item editor is probably not the best thing to do. It basically slows down and it is also overwhelming for a sales user to look at so much information. So we support this concept of what we call as manufacturing BOM rather than sales BOM or manufacturing bill of material, which we can automatically flag. I can do that conditionally. So I have this Boolean which says send directly to provisioning, which to me illustrates that it doesn't need to go to a sales BOM. As soon as I select it, you will see that the actual sales items are basically just 15. And these are the items which need to go back to the quote line item editor. But behind the scene, there are 4000 items, as we saw, which actually need to be captured and sent to provisioning and to your back office ERP systems possibly to be able to do those things when the customer actually converts this to an order. So logic already captures that and we can write back that information asynchronously to Salesforce objects. So we have in our managed package Salesforce objects, and you also have APIs to be able to access that data in logic. To illustrate what that looks like in the screen, I'll just show you a different layout, which I have configured to actually show both sales and manufacturing BOM items. So as you can see, there are 4,015 items in that case. There is hierarchy. You can actually have a levels hierarchy in your items if you wanted to, but essentially in this case, I'm just adding one sales item, which is compute replication cluster. And below that, there are all these manufacturing items which do not go to the quote line item editor, but are captured with whatever custom information you need. They might be your items which are not even in product two. You can have different notes for it, and actually you can have different key value, as many custom fields as you need with logic to be able to capture that information and pass that back to your ERP system. So when we talked about that bill of material generation, this is the aspect which we wanted to also highlight. Once I'm done with this, I have my 15 items, at least for the sales BOM, and 4000 items for the manufacturing BOM. I can go back and add it to the code. So when I added this back to the code, at this point, you are back to the quote line editor, or what is popularly also known as QLE, and this is in Salesforce. From here onwards, everything which you will do, typically the discounting workflows, the pricing rules you may have, as well as approvals, and then document generation, those aspects you will be doing within Salesforce. So the idea is to seamlessly plug the configurator part within Salesforce, and then let rest of the Salesforce processes, which are well matured and work really well for customers, being able to work with them very, very seamlessly. So if you had ways of segmenting information, you wanted to separate out your one-time versus recurring items and run the recurring items through the subscription process in Salesforce Revenue Cloud, you can do all of that even with logic in picture is the general idea. Okay.
Hey
So,
Fazal, just for the sake of time, let's flip over to the admin and just for a time check, we got about 8 minutes to go through that.
okay, perfect. Thanks, Blake, for letting me know. Okay, so I'll go to the admin site and I'll cover a few things faster so that I can at least hit on all the key topics. So number one, our administration is all in Salesforce. So we really spend time, we built it for Salesforce. Our admin persona also accesses logic admin within Salesforce. Different products, you can choose which ones you want to enable for logic. As I said, you do not need to do kind of a very manual setup of multiple steps. Once you have installed the logic managed package, you just come in, these are your product to records, you choose which one you want to enable for logic, and this one click will set up this product to be launched in logic admin. It's that simple. Once I've selected a particular product, then I actually see those products show up in this Visual Force page within Salesforce, as you can see. And I'll go into this cloud workload configurator now. So now I'll hit on some of the key things which we highlighted are required for maintenance. Right. So first aspect is we said we are an attribute-based configurator, right? Which really comes down to having different types of attributes available to you. So we have fields like single select, multi-select, which you can create, which is simple, but we give you a lot of basic properties you can set up just on the field. So if you wanted to make them required, you can basically do that in a very standard way. You wanted to define different types of labels, etc. information, that is just properties of the field you can capture. And you can have, as I said, thousands of fields, which will not matter. In this case, I can also get an admin experience, which is more single page application, so it is fast. The same idea is also applied to rules as an example, and there are few ways in our system to be able to define rules. So you can define the rules in a UI system itself, like in our user interface, in the admin user interface. And a rule typically is going to have that condition and action format as we expect. But with logic, the key difference is we have one type of rule and that's it. And that one rule can have multiple action types. So if I wanted to add a new action, you have few options available to you. And this is very helpful compared to what you might have seen with other systems where they have different types of rules you have to define, and then you keep repeating the same condition and replicating your rule conditions. So if anytime that condition changes, you have to update like these bunch of rules. In case of logic, you can just define that one rule which has the same condition, and you can have all these different action types. Those different action types determine that behavior. So you want to hide a field, you want to show a message to the user, which can be info or error or warning. You can also do a product rule, which can set up a product rule, or you can set a value or exclusion. Essentially, you can exclude certain values from your dropdown, as I showed you in the menu images. When I'm defining a particular rule, one of the key things with logic, as I said, is the flexibility is important. So a lot of stuff you are able to do purely using simple rules. And I'll also show you matrix loader, one of the things which we have invested a lot of time on. But you can also go more and more advanced. So if you wanted to have some sort of an advanced calculation, maybe a table lookup kind of a scenario you wanted to do for a certain field. So if I wanted to, let's say, load a product summary value on from a table, because that's coming from an ERP. Logic gives you a JavaScript syntax basic approach to be able to do that. So which also supports things like auto suggest, which your developers and your technical admins can easily work on, where you can easily see your table lookup, you can operate on that table and you can return that value back if you wanted to. That's the general idea. So we support the simple UI stuff. You can do the more advanced editor stuff as well. But one of the things we really spent a lot of time on was the matrix loader. And the idea was that we see a lot of our business admins as well as our Salesforce admins, they are very good with Excel, with Salesforce data loader and everything they can do. They want to be able to maintain a lot of information through Excel. Even to Frank's example, a lot of times product managers might be doing a lot of information management in different places, and Excel is a common tool which is used by people. And we wanted to make sure that we can leverage the powers of Excel in a really good, meaningful manner. So for us to be able to do that, we support the concept of uploading a lot of data using Google Sheets or Excel, whatever you use. And you can upload things like fields options, rules, tables, even layout information actually in that manner, and many more entities we'll introduce in the future. And system also does the basic fuzzy math wherever it can to say some of this might be a table Excel, some of them are rules, fields, and field options. when the admin will click import, we will follow the right sequence to make sure that the right fields are getting updated first, the field options and the right rules. So an admin can set up a site pretty much in the minutes rather than waiting for hours to be able to set this up. So that's the general idea. That also helps with migration and everything. And because all of this is backed by APIs behind the scene, you have a lot of opportunities to automate this process, set up your testing cycles and everything to be able to maintain your CPQ effectively. And let me make sure then the one thing I would want to go back and also highlight about logic is we have the concept of reusability, and reusability is very key if you think about the long-term cost of administration. So you will introduce more and more configurable products. Let's say new offering comes to the table, but many times you may not require a new configurator for them, and that should be the case in general. To be able to promote that usability, one of the things you really spend a lot of time on is defining more of these containers. So you can have your fields and rules, which you can define once. And then you can define these containers, which we call as a schematic. That schematic essentially can group your fields. You can choose which fields you want in those, which rules you want, and rules will automatically come in as soon as I select different fields for my schematic. And those rules are automatically applied. The reason this works very well is because you can define those fields and rules as a top level entity and can associate them to a schematic and automatically get that behavior for multiple products easily. Plus, you can use the same schematic for multiple products. So your ability to be able to define catalog items as you want the search to work easily in Salesforce is not compromised. At the same time, you get the benefits of reusability with logic. And the same applies for the layouts as well as whatever products you might have associated with it. Last but not the least is we did not stop at just showing you the textual information in a well-organized format. We also wanted to give you more of a visual way to understand what your schematic or your configurable product rules and fields look like. So we developed this concept of hyperjump, which is the logic team built it, where you can have your product or your schematic. You can show what fields are there on that rules and the for that schematic, as well as what rules you have. If you wanted to be able to inspect the data of that field, you can do that easily in this kind of a screen. You can actually even make changes and save them quickly. So you can essentially see all the information you have for this particular schematic on this visual graph. You spot a particular error, you can easily fix that, whether it's a rule or a product, you can do either one of them. You can update those here. Plus, you can also go and inspect. So you can start asking those questions like, how is my workload type field impacting my configuration today? For you to be able to do that, instead of overloading all the information to the user in one screen, we give them the ability to walk this kind of a graph. Where now I have selected workload type and I see what are the options available in workload graph and which rules it is being used in. So it is being used as a condition in all these different rules. If I wanted to, I can always look at these rules itself, make some edits. So I can see that this particular rule is setting some determination for different values like shape of data set, and also setting up different values for the product. You can see all of that information, make changes to it, or you can continue walking that graph further and further. So if I take this machine learning workload type, I see workload type as a condition. I can see it is running a determination rule on shape of data set field, as well as allows CPU 16 and all these fields which are controlling your CPU. And you can essentially keep doing that from here on onwards. You can keep walking the graph. And if you're done, you can keep going back and keep inspecting it. The idea of this is there is a lot of rules engine has a lot of graphical information available, but it hasn't been ever used very well by many systems today. We wanted to make sure that we can expose this kind of an experience for an admin, both for understanding their configurator as you bring new administrators on board, for them to be able to understand conceptually what you have done, as well as for debugging situations. When your rules are not firing, you want to be able to see what exactly changed. You are able to do that in this kind of a visual format. So I think, Blake, those are the few things I wanted to ensure I cover. I know we are over time, so.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Fazal. I think that was a great demo here. So we have about 6 minutes left. I wanted to take some time to answer a few of the questions that got asked. And if we don't get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up and answer those offline too as well. So one of the questions that we had, and Fazal, this is probably best for you, is, as you were showing the layout, That was a product configuration page. Can Logic.io be used to present a custom UI as well?
Yes, so that is correct. The Logic UI is designed to be for any custom UI. We're working with customers who are building their own custom UI on top of Logic APIs today. And that, because of our API first design, supports the same APIs we use for our UI is the same APIs you will use for your custom UI.
Great, awesome. This is a question for Fazal and Brion, I think, together. Does Logic.io replace the standard product configuration of Salesforce CPQ or enhance it and kind of augment and complement it?
Yeah, it's definitely additive. I think we both said that there's lots of reasons to use the configurator that's part of Salesforce CPQ. And then there are situations where something more robust is required. So the intent is that they coexist based on the needs of the customer and the specific product.
Exactly. I think the keyword, as Brian said, is the specific product. You don't worry about rip and replace kind of a situation. Logic is going to complement and be additive on Salesforce CPQ.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification there. Fazal, are the rules in Logic cached on the Salesforce platform cache for performance, or how does that work?
So we do multiple strategies for caching, of course. As you can imagine, as a SaaS vendor, we kind of look at a lot of stuff for that. We actually cache some stuff also on a dedicated compute layer with Logic. That is one of the reasons why rules engine performance can scale up to thousands of users or millions of users, and we can actually auto scale that kind of information. So we have some level of that caching. We also obviously have caching of a lot of information coming from product to metadata. So Salesforce data model supports a lot of that as well for us. So there are layers of caching and information capture we use to be able to do that. Essentially is the answer.
Perfect. One other question we got is, the question was, is Logic available for all industries? I think the answer is it's available for all industries, but Fazal and Brion, maybe you can talk about kind of what we've been seeing from the market so far in terms of what Logic is best suited for.
Sure. So I can get started, and Brion, you can endorse me or overwrite whatever I say. It's okay. I think Logic, yes, as Blake said, is technically available for all industries, but as I think Brion also pointed out, that there are key kind of problems you run into in places like high-tech manufacturing are going to be a couple of them. Even in some cases, you could argue medical devices and others where this may come up, where you have a bundle of hardware, software, services you're trying to sell together, and there's a lot of attribution and configuration, because sometimes complex configurations required, and that ERP connection. Those are the kind of problems where Logic will come in my view, more often than not. But Brion, what do you think?
Oh, sorry, I need to unmute myself. I think that's right. If you think about the complex equipment space or, machinery, whatever, it could be a med device, an X-ray machine, it could be, telecom equipment, but they all seem to follow the same pattern where there's very complex attribution that helps guide the selection configuration process. And there's this need for tremendous amount of data that needs to go into the ERP system to actually produce the configured product. And so I think those are the primary targets. We've talked about business services and other areas as well. But yeah, I think the initial target has been around this, complex equipment manufacturing scenario, whether it's high tech or med device or industrial manufacturing.
Yeah, the only dimension I would add, which kind of makes it a little bit, that's why it becomes a very, it depends question. I agree, is if you think about omni-channel, that's one of the reasons where sometimes Logic can come into picture, because you're looking for that fast rules engine approach to be able to power your e-commerce. And that's where Logic could also be helpful. And we will be happy to talk to you if you have a use for it.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thanks to all of our speakers here today, to Frank, to Brion, to Fazal. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Any final thoughts from either of you three to leave everyone with before we sign off here?
I think the only thing I would say is, like, to your point, if anybody has any questions, I'm sure you will provide them the contact information, and we can respond back to those Q&A as well. If you have a specific question, just reach out to us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to follow up with the recording and with the slides, as well as with the contact information where you can learn more about Salesforce Revenue Cloud, about Logic, and with contact information to reach out to Frank if you want to talk to him and his consultancy there. We're all available to go ahead and dive deeper on any of this information after the call here. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate everyone for attending today's session. Hopefully it was helpful for everyone here. And like I said, we'll make sure to follow up with the recording and the slides later on today. Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brian. Thanks, Brian.